okay, a lot of us, we talk about craft and beats and acts, and a lot of us, we still don't really understand how to structure a pilot. You can read books about it. Uh, could you, I know we haven't got much time tonight. We've got lots of questions, but what would you say about going about, again, I suppose it's the preparation phase. How do you structure your script? How do you structure your pilot in terms of acts and beats?
It's a really, really good question. And this is why, TV is so hard. It's really challenging at the moment in the spec space, because I think TV drama is an absolute golden age. The quality of the work that is coming through and we're watching on screen is just incredible. But writing a pilot, I think, is much harder than writing a feature because of that challenge, which is your pilot episode is functioning as both the first part of a longer story, but it also needs to have a beginning, middle, and end of its own, and it needs to hook. And I think that's incredibly hard to do. The biggest, I would say, the biggest challenge I find in developing pilots is most of the time what gets pitched to me for the pilot episode is the setup. So many times, and I understand why it happens, writers think that basically the inciting incident for the series story happens at the end of the first episode. And I think that's really tricky to take that approach. You can do it. It absolutely can be done. I've just read one today, actually, which is on my slate at Studio 21. And the story really gets going at the end of the pilot. And I think that's really problematic. But my writer might want to keep it in that form. And I'm trying to figure out ways in which we can make everything really hooky and get all the elements of the show into the first ep, even though we haven't started the story that is really the premise of the show. Ideally, I would say the premise of the show and the inciting incident happens in the first 5 minutes of your pilot. So I can give another example that as well as working with emerging writers, we're sometimes brought in to do scripted development for production companies and producers. And there's a really experienced writer and production company that I'm working with at the moment. And even there, it's a writer who's adapting her own novel. Obviously, I can't say who or what, but she's incredibly experienced. She's a showrunner, adapting her own novel. And the pilot episode that I read when I came on board, none of what the show is about was in the first episode. It was all a setup. It basically got the gang together, which is great, except it's not, because all the things I love about the show, which is these characters in the field interacting in a particular way, a certain dynamic playing out, a certain narrative drive at play as the show's kind of hook and premise, none of it was there. And it's like, well, if you pitch me this show and you tell me it's about this, why am I then not watching that in the pilot episode? Like, if you sold me that show, that's the show I want to see in the first episode. I want to get all that stuff on screen. I want to get those relationships up and running. So I think finding a way to start your story of the series as quickly as you can within the pilot is really helpful, because it stops it being a setup episode in which you're just making introductions, but the thing hasn't really got going yet.
Amazing. It's a whole minefield the more you think about it with a pilot, because when you think about that whole series, and it could be like a six ep, or it could be like a 4-season ongoing series. So it's like building this whole world, isn't it? It's so in terms of like when you're working with writers in terms of how to kind of advise them with that, so you're just to kind of summarize what you said, would you say that kind of getting to the heartbeat of the story in the first act is really important?
Yeah, I really do. I think because it tells your audience what they're watching, exactly the way you would if you were writing a feature. If you say my film is this story, but then the first 15 minutes there's none of those characters and none of those things happening, and you're not in the world yet, you'd start to go, well, sorry, I thought I was watching a horror set here with these people, and where is it? So I think all the things that your show is, the theme, the world, the characters, the relationships, and the story engine that is the show, you need to get going in the first act. Sooner the better.
Wow, wow, that is really rich nuggets. Thank you so much. Um, uh, moving on now to more about the kind of story itself.
Mm.
Um, I mean, in a way, this is probably quite an obvious question, but how free should the screenwriter be in, especially if they're kind of writing a spec script as a first-time writer or as a very new writer? How free should they be in devising that story, or should they write and tailor it to fit where they are professionally in their careers? I guess what I mean there is, should it be quite contained, or should they just write something that's just, as something they're passionate about, no matter how ambitious or big the world is?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Ros. It's something we tackle quite a lot at Script Angels specifically, because one of the questions we ask our writers right at the beginning of the process is, particularly when they come to us and there's a specific project they want our help to develop, one of the first questions we ask is, what's the point of this script for you? Like, what's it meant to do for you? What's the intent in terms of leveraging it? Say we spend the next 6, 9, 12 months developing this to a really amazing standard and you've got an incredible spec. What are we doing with it? What purpose should it serve for you? And the reason we ask that question is I think there's two different kinds of specs. I think one is really big and ambitious and it's a calling card. It shows what you can do. There's a really fantastic sci-fi TV writer that I know very well who wrote a really big sci-fi feature, really ambitious, incredibly high budget, about 15 years ago. And it got her agent, and she then went on to create original TV series in this space. But even now, 15 years later, that feature, even though it hasn't been made yet, it's very expensive, it still gets her shows. It's still sent out by her agent as a sample. She had a really established career here, and she then went and got representation in the US. And it was that calling cards feature spec that got her representation in the US as well, 15 years after a career here. So I think a really big, ambitious, all guns blazing, or as intimate as you want, depending on your genre and your preferences, but an absolute example with no holds barred. This is what I would want to put on screen if I was given. It's like Danny Boyle said, there was a film he made, I think it was 127 Hours, where he said, this is my one free go on the roundabout. He'd made Slumdog Millionaire. He knew he would get to make another film, kind of whatever it was, almost. And that was the film he wanted to make. Apologies if I've muddled up my films and my directors, but I just really distinctly remember that idea of like one free go. Like there's a script that maybe isn't that commercial, but it doesn't matter because I really I'm passionate about it. But I think those are the scripts that get you noticed by an agent. And I think those are the scripts that an agent can send to development execs to try and get you general meetings, but they're probably not the script that's going to be your first credit, your first professional writing experience. And so what often happens is that's that next spec script that's in your portfolio that you send as a follow-up to the agent when they've read the first one and they love it and they say, what else can I read? And you send them another one that's equally brilliant, but it might just be tailored to be a little bit more producible. To answer your question, right? It might be the kind of thing that actually could get commissioned from a writer with very few credits. It's lower risk because it's lower budget. So yeah, I think those considerations should be in there. Once you've got a body of work that is all kind of really, shiny, exciting, ambitious calling cards, I think it is worth thinking about actually what is the project that is going to get me my first commission. And then it is probably a slightly different kind of project that you want to be speccing.
That is fantastic advice. Really, really cool. I just really hope that writer gets that film made. I'm really intrigued now. I want to read that script.